Great. Well, thanks everyone for coming to this breakout session. A great first session, as you probably agree. I guess should start by thanking the England football team for being so bad that we don't have the dilemma of staying off the awards ceremony tonight or watching the football game. It's the decision's been easily made for us. So, just looking at the agenda for the rest of today, it's obviously a relatively technical lineup. I'm not from a technical background, very much from the market side, looking at consumer trends, consumer habits. So I guess really this presentation is to put a lot of the technical things we're hearing today, the latest developments on that side of things, into context with what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening in terms of consumer behaviour, consumer trends. In particular, I'm going to be focusing on the premium video market. So not specifically things like YouTube and short-form content, but looking more at the long-form digital video content. So in particular, TV episodes, movies, and within that as well, some of the broadcast TV streaming as well. Just a little bit of background, a few of you in this room may never have heard of Futuresource before. We're now over 25 years old. We're being focused effectively on the content sector for all of this period. Certainly content is at the heart of what we do. So whether that's music, film, education in particular is an area which we're seeing considerable growth in. Television, games, and obviously more recently ebooks as well. And we look at how that content's delivered, whether it's mobile networks, the cloud, internet, VOD, and obviously some of the more traditional based formats of disc and tape in particular, and how those have transitioned to digital. And then really we look at how consumers are accessing this content, what type of equipment. So clearly from a consumer electronics point of view, we're looking at personal devices and in-home devices, whether that's smartphones, tablets, connected TVs, digital media adapters. And then on the B2B side, increasingly, we're investing quite heavily in our B2B teams, looking at the education piece in particular, classroom of the future, interactive whiteboards, all that sort of thing as well. Actually quite separate in some ways to the area I work in. I'm the lead market analyst for content within the content team. I work with a lot of all of the Hollywood studios, a lot of the service providers, likes of Apple, Netflix, Amazon, traditional broadcasters and pay TV operators. And part of my role as well is helping some of these consumer electronics manufacturers understand the content landscape and the service landscape. So interestingly, I would say a lot of my focus in recent years is looking at that, looking at how the likes of Samsung and Sony can understand the content space, whilst also helping the content holders, the studios, the record companies understand the hardware space and how that can be used as a driver for their business. Just to kick off, in terms of the overall market, this is the global spend on entertainment. Last 3 years and also looking forwards. And as you can see, we are seeing steady growth across, as a total, across the overall entertainment space. Now, this might look like a pretty neat slide on a global basis, but this is built up country by country, line by line, including packaged and digital delivery, also broadcast within that. So literally thousands of lines of data come into to actually create this slide here. And it's quite interesting to really put things in perspective, the importance of pay TV in the overall entertainment landscape. We're almost looking at a $200 billion market worldwide. It's consistently over 50% of global entertainment spend, and continues to evolve, continues to be, I guess, at the forefront of innovation when it comes to consumer access of different types of TV and video content. But interestingly, it's probably the one sector which has received the most hype regarding perhaps being the most threatened sector out of all of these. We've heard the term cord cutting come from the US 2-3 years ago. That's people cutting their cable subscriptions to, in theory, go to services like, over-the-top services like Netflix and Amazon. And we are starting to see evidence of that in the last year or so. But the overall spend and the overall market remains pretty robust. And we actually feel that the pay TV sector has significant opportunities moving forwards. And we've just seen Jerome's presentation there, BT Sport come along. It's shaking up the industry in the UK. It's almost acted as a catalyst for some of the other providers really to up the ante. So a lot of this growth here is, two factors behind the pay TV growth. One is emerging markets, and we're seeing huge growth in Latin America, so Brazil and Mexico in particular, a lot of US investment there. And obviously when we've got big showcases like the World Cup and the Olympics coming up, then clearly this is going to help drive investment and consumer uptake in these emerging markets. Secondly is just continued ARPU growth. Now, obviously, average revenue per user is under threat due to the competitive landscape. So we're seeing, some of the operators like Sky in the UK is a great example, Comcast and Xfinity in the US, effectively use digital delivery and over-the-top solutions to complement their core linear services, effectively adding value and reducing churn. And it's keeping that churn figures down. Again, we heard about BT earlier. That's going to be core to the business of anyone in this sector moving forwards. So I've got a little bit more detail on Sky later and what they're doing and how they're trying to keep one step ahead, particularly when it comes to Sky Go and their other streaming and on-demand solutions. The games sector I'll not dwell too much on, but this is a fascinating sector, hugely fragmented, very polarised between the huge publishers at one end and effectively bedroom publishers at the other. And obviously we're on a very fragmented transition from physical to digital media as well. So we're already at over 50% of the games market being digital now, whether that's on tablets or smartphones or massively multiplayer online games or just online gaming via games consoles like the Xbox and PlayStation. But a pretty difficult business to be in unless you've got some really strong properties there. Box office, we like to keep in this chart, just really to, again, provide a little bit of context. Again, people said 7 or 8 years ago that other people wouldn't go to the cinema anymore, that because people have got big screens in their living rooms, that they've got fantastic surround sound systems, that why would you need to go to the cinema? Actually, it continues to grow year on year in terms of revenue. Admissions overall are probably slightly down, but clearly we've seen growth in average prices due to 3D. Obviously, we've seen the introduction of digital cinema as well. Overall, we expect it to be a relatively flat market moving forwards. In fact, any growth will come from countries like China, which are seeing incredible growth in box office. But it's just nice to see almost a bit of status quo here. Despite the growth in the digital landscape, people still like to go out and have this really traditional experience. And there is room for all these experiences to sit next to each other for many years to come. The home video sector is, I guess, the heartland of the Hollywood studios, the Disneys, Universals, Fox, Warners, etc. And overall, we expect that to remain relatively flat. But as we'll see shortly, there are huge changes in the structure of that industry. And the key thing here is, for the Hollywood studios, is maintaining that sell-through culture and that ownership mentality. So the DVD in particular was a huge boom for the studios and the home video industry. No one really could have imagined that we would sell, billions of copies of DVDs worldwide for people to keep at, $20 a time. When DVD was launched, no one expected that market to take off like it did. Obviously, that's planted the seed now of the ownership mentality that people like to keep videos. But that's changing. We've seen the growth in Netflix in particular, which is challenging that mentality. And there are some countries worldwide which are actually shifting away from this ownership mentality towards access and accessing content on a streamed basis and premium video content on a streamed basis. Now, 5 years ago, the streaming experience for premium content was actually pretty poor for most people. I know that these sort of events have been around for many, many years, but actually if you want to sit down and want to watch streamed video on a big screen, 5 years ago, there'd only literally been a couple of % of people who would have had a decent quality experience. Services like Netflix in the video space, Spotify in the music space have raised the bar, and we've seen the infrastructure improve, devices improve, and with that, obviously the business models have changed as well. So this ownership to access mentality is something I'm going to touch on quite heavily during this presentation because it's having huge ramifications for a lot of the content producers in this space. And finally, at the top, probably the most challenged market in recent years has been the music industry. We've all heard how revenues have declined year on year since pretty much 2000, 2001. But we are seeing what we call a bit of an audio renaissance now. So the market in many countries is bottoming out. We're seeing encouraging take-up of premium subscription streaming services like Spotify in many countries. And with that, we're also seeing good take-up of wireless hardware in the home. So likes of Sonos speakers, other wireless speakers, the ability to play out content from your smartphone or tablet in the home. Now, we always said that personal audio, smartphones and iPods, MP3 players would only take the digital music market so far, and that's proven to be the case. We're actually at a really interesting crossroads now where in-home listening is on the up. Like I said, we've seen services like Sonos, we've seen some of the Bose hardware, which have really improved the experience for listening to digital music in the home. So we actually see growth in many markets, in many music markets worldwide in the coming years, because of this shift again in the way consumers are listening to music and some of the shifts in the business models. It's tough though. If we look at the subscription music market, the likes of Spotify aren't making any money, and many of the artists aren't making much money. The record companies are probably the ones who are doing the best out of it. But is there an argument to say that something fundamentally needs to change to make the current business model work for everyone? It's easy to say you could increase prices, but clearly that €10 price point per month for something like Spotify is very, very sensitive and price elastic. So, very interesting times in that space. Now I'm going to focus mainly on the pay TV and the video sector today. But again, I just want to put where we are now into context. Again, this is just consumer spend. This is just paid for content. So within this chart, I'm not looking at ad-funded content. If we look at the Western European content markets and where we are on the transition from packaged to digital, if we look at music, we're still, dominated by packaged music, CDs. People still buy CDs now. That may not be the case as much in the UK, but we look at countries like Germany. They've still got a huge packaged media culture. So in some ways, it shows the potential for the shift to digital moving forward, but also that does the industry really want to move to digital that quickly when it's still got a cash cow of packaged media here? However, it is almost a question of obviously when, but not if we move from digital, from packaged to digital. If we look at the video space, again, this is just home video, so not including pay TV. Across Europe, less than 20% of spend is digital. DVD and a little bit of Blu-ray in here still dominate. And that's likely to be the case in most countries for at least the next 3 to 4 years. So again, huge potential to shift here, but as we move to digital, that sell-through piece of the overall revenues does start to diminish, which is where the margins is for the Hollywood studios. The game sector is pretty much already 50-50 when it comes to digital and package spending. The digital market in many ways has really opened up the casual user base. It's really brought a number of new users to the gaming market. Historically, 8 to 10 years ago, it was a young male-dominated sector. That's certainly changed in the last few years. The Nintendo Wii helped change that, and then the introduction of smartphones and app-based gaming, social networking gaming, just completely changed the landscape for games. So a hugely fragmented market, very changeable, and like I said previously, it's a sector which, unless you're at the top of the game, can be a real struggle. And then, just really again to put this into context, and the importance of packaged media still, is looking at the books market. Last year in Europe, only 7% of the overall books market was digital. You know, the majority, over 90%, were still physical books. And again, this is an industry which has been incredibly challenged. You know, they've not had a format change in over 2,000 years. You know, there's a lot of people in that industry who just weren't used to this disruption. So it is taking a little bit of time to get used to you know, reading books on e-readers, etc. But we're starting to see, you know, some momentum in this space. And it's not just within the consumer sector as well. Obviously, the business-to-business and education sector, in particular the academic sector, is perhaps the biggest opportunity for digital in the long term. So that's putting everything in context, just looking, I guess, at, you know, we're still, despite all the hype we've seen in recent years, still got a long way to go and huge opportunities to grow the digital markets. So that's total Western Europe. Another key point I want to make is that every country is different. Now, there are a number of reasons for this. We mentioned, you know, the German situation where, you know, culturally, just generally prefer the traditional ways of doing things, tend to change a lot slower than other markets, despite actually having the infrastructure to do so. So every country is different, but the US typically is ahead of most other countries when it comes to the shift to digital. Now, this is the percentage of digital consumer spend in 2013. What is interesting is the Swedish market. Obviously, Sweden is the home of Spotify. We've gone very quickly from the music market being dominated by packaged media, almost turned on its head, where the majority of the music market in Sweden now is through streaming. In particular, Spotify, where, you know, we estimate there are, you know, around 2 million premium paid for Spotify subscribers. So that's a huge penetration of the overall population. Again, if we look at the video market, the US, driven largely by Netflix here, also iTunes, 39% of the US video market is now digital, compares to 24% in the UK, which is actually, you know, the highest figure across Europe, just 13% in Italy. So, you know, again, some huge opportunities in these markets. And you can see games and books, you know, huge variances by country. So whilst, you know, it is, you know, clear to have, you know, overall global objectives and regional objectives, you can't ignore some of the regional nuances when it comes to the adoption of digital content. And again, it's not just the how digital content is faring. It's just, you know, essentially we're looking at, you know, what are the attitudes for paying for entertainment content generally. And if you just take the top 5 European countries, compare it with the US, in Spain, the average spend per head on entertainment per year is just $57. And that compares to $390 in the US, which is more than twice the amount in the UK. And as you can see, the UK in particular is considerably ahead of any other European country. So, you know, this propensity to spend on entertainment, again, varies hugely by country. Again, there are not a lot of reasons behind this, cultural reasons, you know, could be infrastructure, could be the retail landscape. In this case, in Europe, we have obviously the piracy situation within Spain and Italy, still a huge situation. We're starting to see, you know, some of the studios now pulling out of selling DVD in Spain just because it's simply not worth their while, largely due to, you know, the rampant piracy, which, to be frank, you know, the authorities just simply haven't been able to tackle. A similar situation in Italy, although Spain certainly is, you know, a difficult market to be in. There are obviously economics factors here as well. You know, if we look at Spain, over 25% unemployment. I think amongst the under 25s, it's around 50% unemployment. So effectively, you know, pay TV, video games and music, they're luxury products for these people. You know, why should they pay for these products when you can get these free illegally. So, you know, the piracy situation and the economic landscape, I guess the whirlwind of these two coming together is having a marked impact on the overall landscape. In the UK, however, you know, generally speaking, we've got a much higher propensity to spend on entertainment. That's the legacy of packaged media going back, you know, 20, 30 years. You know, the strength of the pay TV sector, in particular the strength of the sports pay TV sector. We don't generally in the UK have I guess the wider awareness of the ability to stream pay TV content illegally compared to some of these other territories. So it's you know, we are in a much better position here in the UK than a lot of our European counterparts. Okay, so just want to look at some of the drivers here, you know, just really taking it back to basics. And if we think about some of the countries worldwide and where they are really on this scale, I guess it's easiest to think about the UK. And the UK is probably one of the best case studies within Europe of how we've seen a shift in literally two years, 3 years max, from consumers being a little bit, I guess, uneasy with digital consumption. All of a sudden, the momentum is built very, very quickly. And part of this is due to the infrastructure. You know, we've seen a huge change in uptake in fibre rollout in the last 18 months. Now, you always used to see sort of the Ofcom reports and the Akamai State of the Internet reports. And these always used to get a lot of publicity within the media saying, oh, UK is way down the broadband league table. You know, investment needs to be made. That's changed. You know, we are rising up that table pretty quickly. And we estimate by the end of this year, over half of broadband connections in the UK will have average speeds of over 15 megabits per second. And that's largely due to the rollout of fibre. And obviously the competitive landscape we've seen, again, with BT and Sky driving this, has really changed that. Now, 15 megabits per second seems to be you know, a bit of a benchmark which is stuck for, you know, I guess, super fast broadband in recent years. And not least, that was reinforced by the launch of Ultra HD or 4K services over broadband networks. So the Netflix announcement at CES early in the year. Now, Netflix state that in 15 megabits per second is pretty much the minimum they'd be expecting to deliver 4K or Ultra HD over. So, you know, 50% having that in the UK by the end of the year is pretty impressive. So, we've also got the operators pushing 4G. Clearly, we've all seen the adverts from likes of EE in recent times. Clearly, the cost of that data and the cost of that bandwidth is obviously restrictive for many consumers to watch movies and TV episodes over, unless it's bundled within consumers' packages. However, you know, 4G will, you know, pretty quickly become standard pretty much for all smartphone users in the next 4 to 5 years. So the infrastructure's effectively helped build a seamless experience, which certainly wasn't there for many people 3 years ago. You know, if you tried to watch Netflix when it first launched, for most consumers it was difficult. You know, downloading movies took an age. It just wasn't a good experience compared to just, you know, literally putting a disc in the drive or flicking your remote to Sky Movies. Coincidentally, with the you know, the rollout of fibre, we saw impressive uptake in different hardware formats, and the one device in particular which coincided with that fibre rollout was tablets. We've seen hugely impressive uptake of tablets worldwide, but in particular in the US and UK in the last 2 to 3 years. And clearly they're driving, you know, mobile content consumption. Interesting, we are starting to see signs of a slowdown in tablet sales so far this year, you know, which is worrying, I guess, a few of the manufacturers of those products. You know, clearly Apple had a very strong lead in that area. Then we've seen all the Android products come into the market. Samsung has been very aggressive in that space. But it's, yeah, again, like I said, we're starting to see a little bit of a slowdown in that market. The one area which we are seeing continued growth in is the more connected TVs, but whether that's directly on the TV, through a smart TV, or through third-party devices like consoles, digital media adapters such as Apple TV, Roku, and obviously connectivity within the set-top box as well. And for us, this is, you know, a real big trend we expect to see in 2014 and 2015 is the viewing of premium digital content on the TV, like I said, either directly or through a third-party device. So if you think of, you know, downloading a movie on iTunes or watching Netflix, historically, most people were actually viewing on a PC or Mac. This was typically supplemented by viewing on tablets and smartphones. And yes, there would be, you know, a fairly decent amount of people also viewing via the consoles. But the ability to view seamlessly this premium content via Netflix, etc., on your TV will drive these services moving forwards. Our research has shown that actually many people won't pay for premium content to view on devices like smartphones and tablets. They will consume content there, but it won't be a driver of purchase. But the ability to view on the big screen does drive purchasing. And that's something which you know, we see as perhaps a long-term trend. It's almost as if the devices, the smartphones, you know, the on-the-go type devices are really key for adding value and reducing churn. If you look at the Sky model again, you know, consumers pay, you know, 50, 60 pounds a month because they want to watch sports on the TV, but the ability to watch on the tablet and smartphone, you know, keeps them locked in the longer term. So it's, you know, these devices are largely about consumption. So, you know, 2 years ago we also had like I said, the launch of Netflix. We've had other services launched like Spotify and Amazon. Not only have these launched, but they've evolved as well. So the quality of the services have improved. The content on these services has improved. You know, on the video side, we're almost seeing a bit of an arms race when it comes to getting hold of quality content. A lot of the service providers now are looking at original productions. You know, clearly Netflix, the most high profile with House of Cards. So these are now quality services, and if you think about it, you know, Netflix, £6 a month or, you know, €7-8 a month is pretty good value compared to a pay TV service. And these services are gaining credibility. They are, you know, reducing churn and becoming a part of people's everyday lives. And most importantly, particularly in perhaps countries outside the UK, they are providing alternatives to piracy and file sharing. So this is where price plays a real key role and sensitivity on the pricing. On the retail side, we've seen traditional retailer consolidation. So in some ways that's accelerated consumer behaviour. So, you know, at the beginning of last year we saw half of HMV stores in the UK close. So people need an alternative way to actually purchase content. So in some ways it forced people to, you know, to take up digital consumption. Now you could argue that actually was it the rise of digital video consumption which affected the retailers, and I think we are in a vicious circle here. And then finally, I guess the last piece of the pie is the consumers. You know, all these, you know, four key drivers above effectively allowing the consumer to embrace a strong consumer experience, and they're steadily buying into the digital concept. It is becoming mass market now, whereas, you know, 2 years ago it was, you know, typically just sort of 5 to 10% of the population. And as I mentioned earlier, if there is that existing entertainment culture and that propensity to spend on entertainment, we will see an increase in digital spend overall. So if we look across Western Europe at the premium video landscape, this year we're looking at, you know, over 25 billion views, full-length views. So we're looking at, you know, TV episodes or movies in particular of long-form content across Europe. And clearly the majority of this is still free, and within that, this is mainly catch-up TV services like iPlayer, but also includes the pay TV everywhere services such as Sky Go and On The Go services, which is very slightly increasing its significance moving forwards. So in some ways you could argue that the catch-up TV services have finally provided the stepping stone to paid-for services in the longer term. I know at the time when iPlayer launched in the UK and did set the benchmark for catch-up TV services, particularly on a European scale, there was a lot of, I guess, discontent from other content owners and other service providers, because I guess it falsely provided perception that actually this content should be free. We saw commercial broadcasters, other third-party service providers who basically overnight saw any paid-for business models wiped out. The iPlayer set the consumer benchmark that this content should be free. But we're starting to see consumers realise that actually the content on catch-up TV services is more limited. There is a window in place. It doesn't necessarily have the long-tail content. So if you look at BBC iPlayer, they're launching the BBC Store, so the ability to pay £1 or so for an episode, going back 20, 30 years if you like. Again, so it's just seeding the concept amongst consumers. So as you can see, we continue to see growth in overall consumption of full-length content. So this doesn't include short-form content via YouTube, so your standard clips, your news clips, etc. This is just premium video content. So obviously that does translate as well if we dig deeper into the home video landscape, into this access mentality. Again, the catch-up TV culture has effectively helped with consumers accessing content rather than owning content in the longer term. And if we look at the global home video market, you can see it's still pretty much a $45 billion market worldwide. And historically you had traditionally around 2/3 sell-through and a third rental. Now the rental market, as you can see, despite the demise of Blockbuster, is remaining relatively robust. So people are switching from Blockbuster to pay-per-view movies via their pay TV provider, via iTunes, Blinkbox, etc. Still a tough business to be in because the margins aren't quite the same. What the studios want is to try and keep this sell-through piece at least the 50 to 60% mark. And that's going to be tough because many consumers just don't really see the value in owning digital files, or at least paying €15 for a movie to keep. Compared, they can buy a Blu-ray for €2-3 more. It'll have a digital copy of it. It'll get a DVD in it. It provides them with much more flexibility. So we are seeing experimentation here. We've seen the early EST window. So movies being made available, typically 2 weeks before the release on VOD or on DVD, which has had some impact, perhaps not the impacts the industry would have liked. We're also starting to see some price experimentation, so effectively trying to narrow the gap between a VOD movie, which typically would be about €5, and an EST movie, which for a new release would be about €15. So really trying to reduce that from 3 times the difference to some studios believe it should be around 2 times the difference. And as you can see, the big area of growth is on subscription video on demand. So globally, in 2011, we were looking at 4% of the market being subscription VOD. Pretty much all of that was Netflix in the US. But by 2017, we expect that to reach 26% of the market. It could be even higher. Now, some of our clients argue that this should be categorised within the pay TV category. It's a subscription service. But we believe that you can cut it whichever way you like, the data, but we believe it's having a marked impact on the traditional home video sector. Our consumer research has shown that whilst Netflix subscribers, for example, in the UK, are more likely to buy packaged media, they're buying less than they were 6 months ago compared to the overall population. And within that in particular, the catalogue business of sell-through is really being impacted. So new release is actually still pretty strong if we look at the overall sell-through market. But people aren't buying the library titles which we saw 5 or 6 years ago. The impulse side of buying, you know, £3 to £5 DVDs is going out of the market. And that's partly due, it's not just solely due to, but partly due to the growth in subscription video on demand. You know, the ability to access a range of catalogue movies and also quality TV content is a huge driver in that market. So where we've seen Netflix launch generally, we've seen pretty good growth in the subscription VOD line. If we look at, you know, US and Canada were the first two markets, hugely significant numbers there. I've got a chart on Netflix coming up, but you know, we're looking at over 30 million subscribers in the US. I think, you know, we're looking at around 3 million subscribers in Canada. The UK is probably approaching 3 million subscribers now for Netflix. So it has been a key driver of the overall subscription VOD sector. And again, if we look at the makeup of the digital markets, again, country by country, it does vary significantly. So you know, it's easy to say, you know, the growth in subscription video is impacting existing behaviour. But in many countries, subscription video isn't really launched. You know, in 2013, it just launched in the Netherlands. We expect to launch in Belgium this year. Australia, Netflix isn't launched. So, you know, other types of digital video dominate spend overall. As you can see in the US, UK, Canada, where subscription video is particularly strong. You know, we're approaching, you know, 50% of the overall digital market being subscription. So again, you know, markets do vary tremendously by country, and you know, the players within these markets also vary significantly. If we look in terms of the scale of this activity when it comes to subscription viewing, we look at Comcast Xfinity in the US. I would say, you know, along with Sky, Canal Plus, a few other cable operators, it's perhaps always been at the forefront of innovation in the digital pay TV space, in particular when it comes to on-demand viewing. You know, last year we were looking at around 5 billion views across Comcast Xfinity subscribers in the US. This compares roughly to the same amount of views on Netflix for TV episodes. So, you know, we estimated last year around 5 billion TV episodes viewed on Netflix worldwide. Around 2.5 billion Netflix movie views. Again, you know, pretty significant. If you look at that in terms of time spent, then movies actually flips with TV. You know, Netflix consumers, generally speaking, spend more time watching movies, but in terms of the number of views, then TV episodes wins out. Interestingly, when we compare that to the traditional markets, you know, sell-through DVD and Blu-ray, last year around 1.8 billion sell-through units were sold. So we're already seeing more movies viewed on Netflix globally than DVDs sold and Blu-rays sold. So no, it is a little bit of a shift if you think about it in terms of overall consumer behaviour. Then if we look at digital video movies and TV transactions, so you know, this is electronic sell-through, this is the transactional market, the pay-per-view market. We're still just at 1.6 billion. So, you know, subscription is driving consumption and overall behaviour worldwide, particularly driven by some of these key services we've seen here. So this ownership to access mentality is there for all to see. And if we look at the Swedish music market, I mentioned earlier that the sector's been turned on its head in recent years. In 2010, over 2/3 of the market was of spend was still packaged. Packaged spend, typically CD, you know, would account for 95% of that. And the market had been on a downward trend for many years. We've actually seen in recent years the growth in streaming and subscription, which in 3 years has gone from 21% of the market to 71%. There's no other market worldwide where we've seen this dominance. What is interesting is if we look at the pay-per download market, so typically that would be buying tracks off iTunes or albums off iTunes, was only 11% in 2010 and is only 5% now. So there's 2 points to make here, that the streaming market has actually cannibalised the transactional pay-per download market. But secondly, that pay-per download market was never really established. Most consumers weren't involved in purchasing content in that way. So it did make it much easier for Spotify in particular to change behaviour. But in the UK, it's going to be a little bit more of a slow burn because we've already got an established pay-per download culture. We've already got people who are prepared to spend 99 pence or on a digital track or 7.99 on a digital album. That was never the case in Sweden. So very quickly, this streaming mentality has come about. And it's interesting, this is just the music market, but we are seeing this rapid change in ownership to access mentality in the video landscape too. So Netflix launched, is it the end of 2012 or so during last year? And very quickly, we've seen impressive growth in Netflix in Sweden. And the studios, again, we've seen significant declines in DVD, even in Blu-ray in Sweden in 2013. So, we're seeing a little bit of a worried industry here as how do the content holders in particular take a piece of this streaming pie. So this is I guess an anomaly in some ways, but it just goes to show that if the conditions are right, if the consumer behaviour is there, then things can change pretty quickly. And we expect to see a similar situation in countries like Netherlands, perhaps not to this extent, but we're already seeing impressive uptake of streaming and subscription services there. So it's going to be very interesting to see in a lot of European countries how this develops over the coming years. So this is a different cut on the chart I showed earlier. What we've talked about so far is largely catch-up and on-demand viewing, so the ability to access any piece of content at the push of a button. However, we're seeing the growing significance of simulcasts across Europe, largely driven by pay TV everywhere services and on-the-go services. So I think if we look at the iPlayer stats, if I remember rightly, it's about 15% of all their iPlayer views are simulcasts, are linear viewing. Obviously that peaks during things like the Olympics and the World Cup. But if I remember rightly, it's around 15%. But obviously this is now being supplemented by things like Sky Go, and sports obviously driving this. So viewing this content on the second screen in particular is becoming a real core part of every pay TV operator's strategy. And we saw the app from BT Sport earlier. It's it's core now to any serious player in this space to have that as part of their portfolio. So if we look at the competitive environment, I'm just touching on the UK here, but if we look at any country across Europe, the premium online video space is still hugely competitive. VST and iVOD space, so the ability to purchase content outright via iTunes or just to rent, is incredibly competitive. It's actually very difficult for many companies to realise significant growth in this space, partly because most companies simply don't have the marketing budget to make consumers aware of these different services. If we look at some of the leading players here, Apple, Google Play, Blinkbox, Amazon, obviously part of larger companies. It effectively, I would say subsidising is probably the wrong word, but they're obviously leveraged by the wider company budgets. So it does make it difficult for some of the other companies to have a serious play in this space. And again, a common theme across digital services, digital content services, is differentiation. How do you differentiate your service from someone else? On SVOD, a lot of the differentiation is down to the content itself. So we mentioned Netflix. Obviously, they're restricted in many ways on movies by the window, typically 2 to 3 years, if not more, after theatrical release. But they're differentiating by on content through things like House of Cards, Orange is the New Black, which is having a big advertising push right now. So that they've found a really significant niche there. Now, obviously, Now TV is powered by Sky, so Now TV movies fall in the same window as its Sky Movies service. So we're looking typically 9 to 10 months after box office release for them titles being available on Sky. So a little bit more expensive, but clearly, and again, they've got a really compelling proposition. We've got Amazon Prime Instant Video, which obviously now integrated Love Film. Love Film has been a pretty successful service in this space. Gone down a different approach, effectively bundling it with its Prime free shipping service. So 2014 is going to be a transition year for Amazon in this space. I think 2015 we'll get a better idea of their overall user base, as some people are going to dip out, some people aren't going to be prepared to pay £79 a year for Prime. But I think in the longer term, clearly video will be key to again adding value to the overall space. Then we've got newer players like Wacky TV, which launched in Spain I think 18 months ago. Now here in the UK, again, it is difficult for services like this to differentiate itself. You can't really differentiate on price, because as soon as you cut prices, you cut in margin. Most of these companies aren't making money now. Even Netflix internationally, it's not breaking even internationally because of the costs of expansion, the cost of marketing. It will do eventually, but for companies like Wacky, it's obviously very difficult to break even. And then very quickly on the pay TV VOD side, we've got the usual players who clearly have seen the threat from SVOD, and as I said earlier, really upping their game. And obviously catch-up TV, which is starting to evolve. So ITV players now got paid for content as well. We're starting to see improvements in user interfaces, being available on more and more devices. I guess the winner here overall is the consumer. We mentioned earlier about all the infrastructure and drivers coming into place, but as a consumer, really, it's never been a better time to access video content. So we talked about Netflix. It's been a phenomenal success, and its credibility in particular is grown significantly since its launch. When it launched here, I remember in the UK, people saying, it's good, but the movies aren't particularly great. Compared to some of the other services out there, I can't see the content I want. Then people quickly soon realise that there is actually some pretty decent content on there. And the same with Amazon as well. So these services are complementing each other. So it's invested significantly in content. Obviously, it's an attractive price point as well. €6, €7.99 in Europe, $5.99 in UK. It's typically a tenth the cost of the monthly pay TV bill for many consumers. So it's an easy price. If people forget to cancel the free trial, it's no big deal at that price point. Obviously, its availability. There's no other service really which has embraced multiple devices like Netflix. It's on pretty much every device you can get. They just want to get their service as widely available to as many people as possible. And within that, I guess we could also include the country expansion as well. So we've seen it grow significantly in the last 2 to 3 years into different countries. Pretty much every English-speaking territory worldwide has got Netflix now, I think with the exception of Australia and South Africa. Australia we would expect to be coming soon. So it's certainly got a lot of the low-hanging fruit already. And as with Netflix as well, it always seems to have this vision. It's always thinking about the next big thing. So, for example, 4K. It was one of the first really to embrace 4K. It's going to be one of the key launches already. I think it's already available 4K content if you have the display. So it's always thinking about how it can evolve its service and where it fits into the overall scheme. Obviously, a lot of costs as well. So with content, always comes the cost of content. If you want to be a successful player in providing any sort of digital video service, you've got to take into consideration the high cost of premium content. And again, just referring back to the presentation before, we look at the numbers which BT paid for the sports, for the Champions League and the Premier League. These are huge investments. So massive strategic decisions. And for Netflix to spend the amount of money it did on House of Cards, it's paid off, but it can't do that every month or so. It's got to be very careful how it spends that content budget moving forwards. And linked with this is ARPU growth. Actually, we probably see this as the biggest challenge for Netflix, is how does it grow its average revenue? For every subscription business, there are really two basic key KPIs. One is subscriber growth and the other is ARPU growth. Now, clearly Netflix continues to grow its subscriber base, both in the US, which is exceeded many people's expectations, but also internationally. But obviously there will come a point where that will start to saturate naturally. So it's key then to improve and grow its ARPU. But at the moment, it only has one tier in terms of content tiers. In the UK, that is the $6.99 price point. Now they do have tiers for one stream, two streams, a family package. When it comes to content, it's just one tier. And we feel in the longer term it will have to perhaps provide multiple tiers in order to help increase its ARPU. So that's probably the biggest challenge services like Netflix have got in the longer term. Obviously the pay TV joint ventures will be key for these services. The most high-profile one in Europe to date has been Virgin Media, and Netflix tying up with Virgin Media. A win-win for both. We're already looking at the launch of Netflix in Germany later this year. Already rumoured that Deutsche Telekom will bundle Netflix into its package. Again, it's just a win-win for everyone. In a competitive landscape, for Virgin Media, it's a fantastic play and a fantastic counteraction against Sky. In the US, obviously, there's the net neutrality issue, which I guess you could argue recently came down against Netflix's favour, but we feel in the long term, perhaps it's almost a little bit of a non-issue. The ISPs, the cable companies, the broadband service providers and Netflix are going to have to work together. And rather than work against each other, partnerships, I think we'll see more and more partnerships moving forwards. And at the end of the day, consumers pay good money to access high-speed internet. In our view, the reason they do that is because they want to access services like Netflix. So, it's a very sensitive argument, but I think we will see, a lot more cooperation in this sector. And obviously, it's less relevant. It's been less of an issue outside of the US today. Obviously, we're going to see increased competition, and the costs with international expansion are obviously significant. We are starting to see, another raft of countries come on board, but international expansion costs money. Just very quickly, its streaming revenues grew 40% in 2013. 44 million global subscribers, 10 million internationally. Key countries, we mentioned some of these already. We expect Germany, France, Belgium this year, and probably a couple of others, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, Australia, maybe Japan next year as well. So it's going to continue to grow and I guess really become the de facto brand for premium subscription video streaming worldwide. And what's interesting is if we look at the uptake of Netflix, this is taken from our Lingua Digital Consumer Survey. What is interesting is it's not just, people aren't just taking it standalone. Pay TV movie subscribers are almost twice as likely to take Netflix to complement their existing viewing than the overall base, which is pretty impressive when they're already paying 50, £60 for pay TV. Very popular amongst families is Netflix. 26% of 19 to 25-year-olds take Netflix or access Netflix. So it's pretty significant already. Interestingly, only 4% of over 45-year-olds take Netflix compared to 10% of the overall population. And we talked about Sky. It's clearly got this multi-pronged strategy. It's in 9.8 million homes in the UK. 50% of the base takes Sky Movies. But Sky On Demand now reaches 86% of homes and 4.4 million of those connected. So around half, I think it's just exceeded half actually. Around half of its homes are now connected to the ability to access over-the-top content or managed over-the-top content. Sky Go's got 2.4 million unique monthly users, so around 25% of all subscribers use Sky Go on a monthly basis. And interestingly, I think this is now approaching 1 million now. Sky Go Extra, paid for service is £5 per month. A significant proportion are now paying to access the increased functionality of Sky Go Extra over Sky Go. So now for us, that's pretty impressive. It's been had the foresight to include a paid-for element of £5 a month to Sky Go. So that gives people the ability to download movie content for a limited period. Plus, it gives them extra devices. We heard Jerome talk about buy and keep on the BT service. Sky have had a high-profile launch there as well recently. And then separately, it's got Now TV. Now TV is aimed at non-Sky subscribers as a low-cost option to access premium video and TV content as well. So it's £9 a month for the movie service, and I think it's an extra £5 a month to access the TV services. So being able to access the Sky content, Sky Atlantic, things like 24 as well. Again, £5 a month, no commitment, is, again, it's very competitive. But moving forwards, we do expect to see the market be dominated. I say dominated, perhaps too strong a word, but these big international companies will have a huge role to play in the digital video landscape. Obviously, Apple, Google, Netflix, Amazon, I guess you could say are the big four. Does Samsung have a role to play here as well? Plus some of the local pay TV operators as well. But we're already seeing Sky, Canal Plus, getting more of a European footprint. Obviously, Liberty Media as well. It costs money to be in this space. If you want to be in the over-the-top video, premium video space, you need deep pockets to make it worthwhile. I'm just aware of the time, so very quickly looking at the development of the different types of hardware. Smart TV clearly is going to be the biggest growth hardware products moving forwards. People are buying these by default. They're not necessarily buying smart TVs, they're going to shop buying a TV, and for most consumers, that's a bonus that has this connectivity. So we're seeing connectivity rates of around 70% in smart TV now, so 70% of owners are connecting it to the internet. This is a big growth area at the moment, the digital media adapter. So obviously we saw the Chromecast launch, we've got Roku, we've got Apple TV, obviously the Amazon Fire TV. But what role does it have in the longer term when we have effectively the same capability on smart TVs and the set-top boxes? We talked about the importance of the pay TV providers, but the most connected device in people's homes in Western Europe in the longer term will still be the set-top box. So people talk about the death of the set-top box, but clearly, what do people do when they walk in the living room? They pick up the pay TV remote control, and that's the first thing they do. So that culture's not going to change for a long time. Obviously, smartphones and tablets. By 2017, we're looking at over 3 billion smartphones in use worldwide, almost 1 billion tablets. And obviously, premium video is an opportunity here. In some markets, particularly emerging markets, there will be opportunity to monetize that. I'll flip through that one. And again, just using some data from the BBC, looking at how the viewing is fragmented. in recent years. So taking the iPlayer views data from pretty much May of every year till we got to April this year, the May data is not available. How we've seen a shift in viewing from PC and Macs into a whole host of fragmented devices, but clearly viewing on portable devices is, as you can see, that's approaching 50% of all viewing now. Pay TV is remaining relatively steady overall, but it is interesting to see how the viewing on laptops and PCs is disseminated. 4K is something which is obviously very hot at the moment, or ultra high definition. We do feel that, as we can see on here, the delivery of 4K is most likely to be via fibre and via broadband. There's a lot of talk about 4K on Blu-ray. That specification is not even likely to be ratified till next year. The pay TV operators obviously have bandwidth issues. So, many people won't be able to access 4K via broadband, but for those who have bought a 4K TV in the next 2-3 years, they're more than likely to have fibre connectivity. So it's not so much of an issue. And by 2018, we expect 21% of sets in Europe to, 21% of households in Europe to have 4K TVs. So in summary, 4 in 5 online consumers still don't buy digital video, so there's still massive potential here. Behaviour varies considerably by territory and by country, which I hope I made that point earlier. This ownership to access mentality is going to be evident everywhere. It's a question of when, not if. We talked about the service expansion and evolution. It's costly, and there are significant barriers to entry related to this. Services need to differentiate, but it's much easier said than done. And we do believe that viewing digital video on TVs will drive spend. It's what consumers are used to, so we expect to see growth in things like DMAs, viewing on smart TVs in particular. But personal devices will drive consumption, both in the short term and the longer term. So I think I've overrun, I wasn't expecting to, but has anyone got any questions? Hi.
I've got a couple of questions, if that's all right. On the pie chart you showed at the beginning, the packaged versus digital consumption, if you were to add piracy to that, where would that, how would the pie charts change?
Across Western Europe, you will probably see a little bit of a shift in favour of digital. People still buy packaged pirate product, particularly in countries like Spain and Italy. But in terms of overall consumption, in certain countries, piracy does really bump up the overall consumption, like Spain and Italy. Again, not as much of an issue in the UK. Interestingly, in Sweden, obviously, had a big piracy problem because they've got great networks and nothing to download. So you have this digital piracy culture developed pretty quickly. I guess the problem with with overall piracy, and particularly digital piracy, is enforcing legislation. So we don't actually see, in most developed markets, we don't really see many convictions. So I think in Sweden and Germany there's literally been a handful of convictions. I think Germany is probably the best one where they've actually followed through. So you can send warning letters out, but generally speaking, it's not perhaps been as policed as well as it could be. And a classic case is France. They brought in this 3 strikes rule, had a good impact on the overall content price in the short term. Had a change of government last year, and it had. They weren't interested. They were more interested in the economic situation, and piracy falls down the agenda. So it's getting the consistency of these policies is going to be key. But piracy is always going to be there. There will always be some consumers who will pirate content, and that's fact of life. It's just managing that.
I was wondering because I think you made the point when you had the pie chart that there was a challenge to move consumers from packaged to digital content.
Yeah.
And I was wondering whether that's the main challenge, or maybe it is the main challenge. Is there another challenge which is to move people who believe they should be getting things for free digitally to understanding that they should pay for them?
Yeah, if the services are there, we've seen it in countries like Sweden. If the services are there, people will move. Not everyone, but there'll be enough people move to make it worthwhile. But yeah, I mean, it is a good question. And like I said, there are always people who don't want to pay, but they were never paying in the first place. It's making sure we don't lose consumers to piracy, which I think we're at a point now where, you know, the number of people pirating isn't significantly increasing. That it is, say, manageable might not be the right word, but it's not impacting the markets like it did a few years ago. Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, thanks a lot for your time. I will be around at lunchtime, so if anyone's got any further questions, that'd be great.